Welcome to the Even Better podcast, where your host, Sinikka Waugh of Your Clear Next Step, brings you exciting content about making communities better by helping people get even better at work.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of the Even Better podcast. This is your host, Sinikka Waugh, and I'm so delighted to welcome you back today. And today with us, we have returning guest, Faye Howard. Faye, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Sinikka. So fun.
This is such a joy. And for those of you who don't know Faye, you are going to have to listen to one of her earlier podcasts and then stay tuned because there will be more to come. I am just so delighted to have Faye as part of our team now at Your Clear Next Step. Faye and I have been working together for a long time, and it just seems like it took a long time to get this has been a test in our patience. I think Faye and I have both been wanting this, and we've been wanting to work together, and we have been very trusting and very faithful in just taking baby steps along the way and putting one foot in front of the other, working on little things together, one thing at a time, one class at a time, one opportunity at a time, until finally Faye is part of the Your Clear Next Step team and doing some other things on the side. And just what a joy to have her as one of our trainers and coaches as part of the Your Clear Next Step team. And now she is part of our training fleet, teaching emotional intelligence with us and some change classes with us and some building your leadership effectiveness classes, part of the Gary Walljasper series, and doing great things for our clients across the nation. Just what a joy. Faye, thank you for the work that you do on behalf of Your Clear Next Step. And I know you've got another day job that you do on, for the rest of your week too, but at least one whole day every week you are dedicated to Your Clear Next Step and to serving our customers, and we and they are all better off for it.
Well, thank you. Like you said, it's been a journey, but I think those faithful steps, just as we kept going forward, it definitely has paid off. So yeah, I am super excited to be here.
What fun. So we are here today talking about 4 things to remember when receiving feedback. And this is one of our quick hit, catch this podcast on your break. It's not one of the big, long, get comfy on a long lunch hour podcast. This is a quick hit podcast, some usable, practical, tactical tips as part of our Changemakers podcast series. Faye is one of our Changemakers trainers. And so if you are interested in learning more about our Changemakers series, you can check that out on our website at yourclearnextstep.com and then look for the Changemakers prompt at the top of the screen. But this is 4 things to remember when receiving feedback. Now, Faye, talk to us a little bit. Why is this topic important? Why did you pick this topic? Why do we need to remember stuff when we're getting feedback?
Yeah, so great question. So I think as we talk about emotional intelligence and we talk about wanting to be even better, there's sometimes feedback that we get from people, and we at Your Clear Next Step, we take the stance that feedback is a gift, right? It's something that someone is giving to you, and it is not necessarily to point out everything you are doing wrong, but it is to make you even better because someone cares enough about you to give you some feedback. And sometimes I guess we have more of a reaction rather than a response to feedback. And that sometimes always doesn't work in our favor. So I think it's important. One, we want to be liked, right? We're wired to avoid discomfort. And so when we get feedback, we sometimes don't know how to react to it or respond to it. And so I think using emotional intelligence is a great way. And I want to talk about 4 things that are pretty easy to consider as someone is giving you feedback, whether it be, at an annual performance review, or if it's just something in passing or a conversation that somebody may have noticed.
Awesome. And so let's pause for just a second, because feedback can be positive, feedback can be praise, but feedback can also be corrective, right? It can be critical. Feedback isn't always fun to get. Yes?
Absolutely. And I like to look at it as feedback is a data point, right? So it might be someone's perception, and they may have a negative perception per se, and maybe they're just having a bad day, just want to pick on somebody, right? And so they're just going to point something out. But I look at if those data points add up over time and you maybe start to hear a similar message or a trend, then maybe it's a behavior or something that you want to be thinking about. Like, wow, is this really impacting my relationships? Is this how I want to be perceived? Is this is this what other people think of me when it's really not my intention? So exactly, feedback can definitely be praised, but I think, and also there needs to have some critical feedback happen too. But again, as the receiver of the feedback, you're the one that can determine, what am I going to do with it?
You bet. Okay, so let's get to it. 4 things to remember when
good.
receiving feedback. The first one is be approachable. So what does that mean to us, Faye?
Yes. So typically when someone approaches you with feedback, maybe I'm speaking from just personal experience, but I tend to get defensive, right? So what are you doing telling me that I'm wrong? Because I'm hesitant about what people say. Again, I want to be liked. I want to be seen as someone who's contributing well, right? And so if you're not approachable, people are going to be very hesitant to give you feedback. And so how can you be an even better version of yourself if you have this wall, right? So if someone is willing to give you feedback, that's an opportunity. So how can you just be approachable? And whether it just someone asks, hey, I have a thought I'd like to share with you. If now is not a good time, could you say, hey, give me 5 minutes and let's come back? Or absolutely, I'd love to hear what you have to say, right? So being open and available, and I think that's just a really good model too, if you are leading other people as well, because then they see that you're approachable to receiving feedback. It's hard. It's hard
For
though.
sure. Okay,
Yes.
so quick self-awareness tip, and I know that our listeners can't see us because they are just listening on the audio file here. But if a self-awareness, self-management tip, because in emotional intelligence, you teach self-management. So approachable, what does approachable look like on our faces? Is there a body language tip? Is there something we can do with our faces, with our bodies to demonstrate that we are more approachable? Any quick tips there?
That's a great question. So I would say just be aware of when someone asks you that question. What's your stance? Do you all of a sudden cross your arms, like in a defensive pose? Or do you make eye contact with them? And are you open to receiving what they have to say, looking them in the eye and saying, sure? Or if now's not the right time, maybe you're rushing in between meetings or something, just saying, you know what, right now I'm on my way, but this conversation is important to me. So can we maybe catch time a little bit later on in the day? Or can we take a look at calendars? So again, I think posture, I think eye contact is definitely going to be critical. And where
Yeah.
you are in the moment, right?
Yeah, I love it. So we got some verbals, and we got some nonverbals. I love it. All
Right.
right, so let's
Right.
move to number 2,
Mhm.
show appreciation. Show appreciation. What does that look like, Faye?
Yeah. And this might not come right away. So maybe someone has given you some feedback and you're just like, oh, now I have to say thank you for that. Right. So I think that the point here is really just acknowledging the person for sharing that feedback with you, whether you agree with it or not. It took a step of courage. It took a step of confidence. It shows maturity when someone can say, hey, I see this in you. And because I care about you and want you to be even better, I'm going to share this information with you and share this piece of feedback with you. Right. And that's hard. That's hard to do because you don't know how that person is going to react or respond. So again, it may not be in the moment that you're like, well, hey, thanks for sharing that. However, when you come back around, you can hopefully start to see that they had your best intention in mind and come back and thank them, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. I think
Yes.
for years in the Your Career Next Step class, feedback is a gift, or giving and receiving the gift of feedback. We teach that when you receive the gift of feedback, your first 2 words, especially if you can't think of anything else to say, the first 2 words out of your mouth have got to be thank you. And maybe the rest of your thought is thank you. I need time to process that. Thank you. I disagree. I really have got to wrestle with that. Or thank you. That used to be true. Look at what I've done. You may have other thoughts, but those first 2 words have got to be thank you, because this person has just given you this gift. They've showed this tremendous act of courage, as you say, to put themselves out there and to share their care for you, that they want you to be even better. That is a gift. That's putting themselves out there.
Right. And you think about tangibly, like if you receive a gift for Christmas or your birthday. I remember one year my husband gave me garden gloves because he said, you know what, for Christmas, said, I know you like to work in the yard and things like that. And really, I was like, I think you just waited to the last minute to see what kind of gift you would give me. So I had to open that gift. And while I was kind of like, I don't understand the intent behind this gift, to your point, I said, thank you. But I had to like understand. So why would he have given me this gift? And then he was able to clarify. He said, you know what? You like to work in the yard. I thought maybe we could work on it together. I mean, thankfully that wasn't my only gift that year, but I could start to appreciate the gift of garden gloves, right? But again, we open it, we say thank you, even if we still have to process it a little bit more.
It just buys us that time. Show appreciation.
Yeah.
All right. So
Yep.
for our listeners, if you are just dialing in, we're here with Faye Howard, and we are talking about 4 things to remember when receiving feedback. If you're just dialing in, you got to go back to the beginning and start all over. If you got distracted while you were driving as you weren't paying attention, rewind. We talked about being approachable and showing appreciation. We're on to number 3, knowing your triggers. Oh, Faye, what does this look like?
Yes. So this is definitely a practice in self-awareness, right? And self-management. So when someone gives you feedback, what is your first reaction, right? Is your first reaction to get angry, to get defensive, right? To cross their arms? Are you interrupting when they are sharing their feedback? Do you get emotional? Do your eyes start to leak a little bit, right? Because that happens, right? So I think what's really important is knowing, especially if you know maybe some feedback is coming or maybe not expecting it, how can you be prepared to manage the triggers, right? So for example, if your first reaction is to interrupt, I mean, maybe you literally like bite your tongue, right? Maybe you just keep it to yourself, right? Or I've also heard that if you start to leak from your eyes, right? If you can channel that energy somewhere else, can you tense your legs? Can you put that blood and that energy somewhere else? And so then you're not necessarily quote unquote crying. And again, crying is not bad, but it just might not be appropriate for a situation, right? Yeah. So what is your face saying and how can you become aware? Is your jaw clenching? Can you unclench your jaw? Did you ball up your fists? Can you have more of a relaxed posture? Again, but if you don't know your triggers, you're not going to be able to manage them. So being able to identify, oh yeah, how do I respond is definitely critical.
Yeah. I remember years ago, I had a coaching client that one of the things that she and one of her team members were really, their relationship was just really at odds. And one of the things that I invited her to do was to look in the mirror when she said that person's name, because I could see what her face was doing. Their relationship had eroded so very much that now when she said even that person's name, her whole face would change. And she was just so frustrated and so irritated. There was so much negativity, so much baggage had built up that she would say her name and her whole face would just turn to anger and frustration and hostility. And I said, I'm going to need you to look in the mirror. Here's a coaching exercise. I invite you to look into a mirror when you say her name and watch what your face does. And she came back to me just devastated, just absolutely devastated. She said, this is what I do. We got to fix this. And just that awareness, right? You didn't, if you don't know your triggers, right? If you don't know, how can you fix it? And so if someone is giving you feedback, if someone is giving you feedback about your performance on that particular task, or about something that you've written or something that you've delivered, or about a thing that is a chronic pain point for you. So, okay, here's another one. I have a questionable relationship with time. I've been working on it for my whole life, but my relationship with time is something that is deeply, deeply challenged. And so when someone says, hey, Sinikka, you're late, like I know that is a trigger for me because it's something that I struggle with and I've wrestled with it for years. And so when someone gives me feedback on my punctuality, the whole inner battle will just come right out on my face, in my body language. If I don't manage that, the person who gives me that feedback is going to see all of that, because I don't play poker, right? They're going to see every bit of that on my face and they're going to think it's directed at them. But it's not directed at them. It's directed at me, because doggone it, after years, I should be able to have this managed.
I hear you. And if we can even go back to like step one, what does your body language say when you're approachable? I've had people tell me like they'll see me working it and they're like, wow, you're in the zone. Can you be bothered? Right. My brow might be furrowed because I'm staring at like an Excel spreadsheet or you know what, I'm reading something. And they're like, ooh, you know, is that okay if I interrupt her? Right. And so that could also be a trigger for me too. If I am in the zone and someone interrupts me, and oh, by the way, they want to give me some feedback. I mean, that could go sideways too if I'm not conscious of what my triggers might be. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, so we'll get to number 4 here.
It's
4 things to remember when receiving feedback. Last one is ask questions. Ooh. Okay, how do we do that?
Yeah. So I think the point here is, again, not to ask questions to defy or defend, you know, where this person is coming from, but really it is about trying to understand where the person is coming from. The curiosity piece, right? Tell me more, you know, where have you seen this show up, right? And hopefully it might help diffuse some of those feelings of maybe anger or frustration that you might have. Now, every situation doesn't necessarily maybe lend itself to conversations, but if I go back to questions, but if I go back to the garden glove example, right? I open this, thank you. So help me understand how you thought about me when you got these garden gloves, right? I'm curious. What made you select garden gloves as a gift for me, right? And so again, if you open the gift and you're not quite sure where it's coming from, then what kind of questions can you ask to maybe better understand? Because that person might not have been able to articulate, especially if there's corrective feedback or something coming at you. They probably have a bundle of emotions and triggers anyway as they're going into the conversation with you. And what they want to say might come out sideways, right? And so you can ask questions to kind of help align you both of, this is what I heard you say. Is this what you meant? And then kind of align that way.
Okay, so I have this recollection that I've heard you tell a story about sometime early in your career about receiving feedback. And I'm going to ask you to share this story with us. And I'm going to ask you to be really, really intentional about these 4 steps. And
Sure.
if you nailed it, if back at that early moment in your career, you were the master of all things emotionally intelligent and receiving feedback, and you nailed it, and you're like, here, this is how I was approachable, and this is how I showed appreciation, and this is how I knew my triggers, and I asked questions, and you were the hero of the story, and you can spell that out for us, great. And if you missed it, then also the narrate for us, okay, here's what I could have done even better. Like,
Yeah.
take either way, like pause in the story to say, oh, here's what I did and here's what I could have done even better because here's the outcome. Like, tell us how, be real in this story. If you nailed it,
Yeah.
nail it and celebrate that because that's awesome. But if you learned something in the story, take it however you want, but help us be intentional with these 4 steps. Be approachable, show appreciation, know your triggers, and ask questions.
Okay. Yes. So yes, this was early in a supervisory role. So I'd never managed people before, and I was working in a contact center. And so I had 2 team leads that were great at managing the day-to-day, the data and things like that. But I was still a presence in the contact center, right? And if you think about a contact center, for most organizations, that's usually like a stepping point into an organization, right? And so you've got young people, you know, moldable professionals, right, that are just trying to understand what's kind of happening. And I got my foot in the door, you know, now what do I do? And so a colleague and I, we were walking down the hall to go get some water. And we were just having some conversation. And she gave me a very nice compliment. You know, she said, I really appreciate how you are presenting yourself professionally, you know, in your dress, how you dress, in your level of confidence and things like that. And, you know, several of the younger females that are entering into this space, you know, you're a great example for them. And so I was like, oh, okay, this is great. Super flattering, right? And then she followed up with the question. She goes, but do you realize how fast you walk? And we were walking down the hall and I kind of looked at her and I said, well, no, I really haven't thought about it. So if I think about how approachable I was, I think we had that relationship where she felt comfortable enough where she could she could share the feedback, and I respected her enough where I knew that, okay, she was going to tell me something that would help me be even better. I was a little shocked at first, right? So if I know my trigger, I don't know that if I said thank you, right? But I said, you know what? I really haven't thought about that. And then I was like, who cares how fast I walk? Right? Big deal. It's my pace. It's who I am, right? So then what she continued to do, which allowed me space to think, is she said, you know what, your pace might suggest to these people that you're too busy, you're too important, you know what, you're too much in a hurry, because I know how important it is to walk through that contact center, make connections with people. They are on the phone with customers all day long, and they want a little bit of a respite and to say, hey, you know what, my quote unquote boss sees me. They see the work I'm doing. They care about me, right? And she said, when you breeze through, it might seem like I'm not interested. And that was the farthest thing from my mind. That's what I loved about that role, is I cared about the people, right? I cared how they were doing. I was glad that they came to work for our organization. I was invested in how they were growing and what was working and what wasn't working for them. So my intent was never to look too busy, too hurried, or too important. But until I had time to process that, I was put off by her comments, and I was a little bit offended. I was like, what do you mean? Right. But then I remembered. So again, this was probably over the course of several years. I think, you know what, I said, thank you. We walked back and just kind of started our day, right? Or started our day back. So it wasn't like it was this big thing where we dug deep into the conversation, but it did cause me to pause and think. And so while I still am a fast walker, I took her feedback to heart and slowed my pace when I was walking through that team or that department. I would stop and say hello. Or if I knew that I had to be somewhere, I would simply say, hey, you know what, I've got a buzz because I've got to get to this next meeting or my next commitment, right? And so as the receiver, I had the opportunity. How was I going to respond, or was I going to react? Because I think our first instinct, just as human beings, is to react, right? And I think we talk about this in emotional intelligence, is that how many times have we maybe received an email from somebody and we just want to fire back something? But we have to realize that that email or that person is not a tiger ready to jump at us, right? And take us down, right? It's not this fight or flight. We can take a moment to pause, right? And we can take a moment to respond. And so I took some time to ask myself questions, right? Is this really how others perceive me? And these patterns that I'm demonstrating, this is not how I want to be perceived. And what can I learn, right? So how can I be a better version of myself? I didn't do it perfectly. And I told her, actually circled back and said, thank you. That's been probably just over a year now, as I was writing a blog about feedback. And I was like, oh yeah, yep, that truly was a gift. I might not have felt it in the time, but I circled back several years later and said, you know what, I don't even know if she remembered the time, but I said, here's a time where you gave me feedback. And looking back now, I can say it was a gift. So
thank you for sharing that story.
Absolutely.
So for those of you, we're keeping this one short and sweet. So for those of you who want more of these stories, more of these tips, Faye is teaching with us in our Changemakers series, and we'll take just a quick moment to talk about a little bit about Changemakers. Faye, you started teaching with us on an emotional intelligence curriculum, and you've done a couple other things with us. Tell me just a little bit about your experience with Changemakers, just candidly. What have you seen? What have you liked? Any highlights for you so far with Changemakers?
You know, what I think I've seen, what I really like the most is the cohort, right? So how we've structured it, where it is a group of people that start together and end together. And emotional intelligence is the first class of change makers. But what was really neat, when I was able to teach bringing out the best in others with the same group of people, it was really neat to see how they had grown and changed and become more vulnerable, and were able to talk with each other a little bit more. So I'm really excited. Actually, I think I teach one next week. I think I teach bringing out the best in others. And so while I didn't get to start emotional intelligence with this cohort, I'm really looking forward to seeing what they've learned. I think there's just such a rich experience when people can go through curriculum together if they're at the same organization, even better, right? So they can share their experiences and start to implement the tools and what they're learning. So I think that's great. And I just love the light bulbs that go off when I teach emotional intelligence, right? It's people being able to articulate, oh, this is a trigger. Okay, I'm being self-aware right now, right? And this is why I get to, and this is how, so seeing people connect the dots, again, it's not necessarily new information that's been around a while, but being able to put some context and some words around it is really helpful. And it's been great to see people use it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So for those of you who are less familiar with our Changemakers program, you can find more information on our website. We believe here at Your Clear Next Step that Changemakers are those who have the ability to make change stick within an organization. And they consistently do three things. They put the good of the organization first, they make authentic human connection, and they treat change as a process, not an event. And emotional intelligence is a foundation for that. It's how we make authentic human connection. And making that authentic human connection then is part of the driver to putting the good of the organization first and treating change as a process, not an event. So it is a foundational class, and I'm just so glad to have had this time with Faye. Faye, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you, Sinikka. I love what we're doing at Your Clear Next Step, and I can't wait to see more change makers continue to make change.
You bet. You bet. Thank you for all of you who are listening out there. And on behalf of all of us here at Your Clear Next Step, we hope the rest of your day is even better.
Thank you for tuning in today. The Even Better podcast will be back with more content soon. But in the meantime, subscribe to our podcast or check out our website at yourclearnextstep.com for more information. See you next episode.